So this is effectively an SME surgery. And I know that you will have been thinking about the impact of electrification and decarbonisation on fleets throughout the morning. And this session is really just to focus in on SMEs, so small, medium businesses and also micro businesses as well, because they're a key and very significant audience actually in this area. Not fleets as such, but in and of themselves, they constitute a massive fleet if you think about all the very small businesses with 1 or 2 vehicles. So we'll be thinking about them as well as part of this session. So I'm really pleased that you've all joined us, those of you who are attending the conference today with the BVRLA. Thanks to them and for inviting us, and thanks to all the sponsors who are making sure that this event can happen. So we're all from the Energy Saving Trust, and my name is Tim Anderson. I'm the Group Head of Transport. So I oversee everything really transport in Energy Saving Trust in the UK and overseas as well, if occasionally we do something overseas. And I've got with me members of my team who will be kind of looking at 3 different areas really around SMEs and things that they need to be thinking about at this current time. And the time has never been more ripe, if you like, for listening to this message around decarbonisation and particularly electrification. And so in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Ian Featherstone. Ian's just going to be thinking about electric vehicles specifically and SMEs, some of the things that SMEs are finding challenging, but also can think about and what solutions are available. I'll then come across to Heather. So Heather is from our Scottish team, and she's going to be looking at clean air and the impact of clean air zones, or in Scotland, low emission zones, and some of the solutions surrounding that. And then finally, Nick Harvey is going to be talking about small businesses and how they deliver things. So deliveries, last mile, and some of the areas associated with that. So that's the plan. So we will be talking to you for about 15 minutes or so from now. 5 minutes each, strict time instructions for my team. And then after that, we'll effectively just open it up as a surgery. As I say, please do feel free to put things in the Q&A box, or indeed the chat box. We'll keep an eye on both of those, and Rachel from BVRLA is moderating that as well. So we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully at the end of this 15-minute session, we'll have an open conversation. We'll take as many of your questions, comments, ideas to fill in the remainder of the session, which will take us through to about 1:20. So I hope that all sounds good to all of you. Thanks again for joining us. Please do start putting your questions in as the team are talking. And for now, I will hand over to Ian to talk about electric vehicles and SMEs. Ian, over to you.
Thanks, Tim, and hello, everyone. Well, it's taken some time, and as someone who's been working in this area for over 10 years, it feels like a long time, but we really are now seeing electric vehicle sales growing consistently. And the great thing about working with SMEs and micro businesses is that when decisions are made, those organizations can usually act really quickly. And, you know, from a supplier point of view, wherever you are in the supply chain, you can see the impact of any help you've been able to provide, often within weeks of speaking with people. In terms of starting points, well, starting point for businesses, no matter how large they are, is really good information and an understanding of the market and products, which are quite different in many aspects to conventional vehicles. One of the main areas of support we provide to this market is online or face-to-face sessions, which can cover company cars, vans, or infrastructure. And, you know, we tailor sessions to the actual audience. The overall approach, though, is to cover the important aspects that need to be taken into consideration before you put electric vehicles on the road. A number of earlier speakers have spoken about the really impressive improvements in vehicle choice. And although there still are gaps, you know, large vans and certain other areas in the car market as well, there's also been great progress in vehicle capability. So, you know, that's where we start, and that's where businesses need to start. Businesses need to understand the market, what vehicles are available and what their capabilities are, how much energy they use, and how this relates to charging times, real world range, etc. We quite often find that businesses last looked at electric vehicles 3 or 4 years ago. You know, the market has changed so much and the vehicles have changed so much over those times that basic research is just so important. We will then cover charging at home, business premises or en route. And, you know, that might include a practical demonstration of, you know, ZapMap, for example, so that businesses can actually understand what infrastructure is in the areas they operate and how much it might cost to use it. And we also relate vehicle specifications to charging infrastructure. So if 11 kilowatt charging doesn't quite do it for some use cases, then why not consider 20 to 25 kilowatt direct charging DC infrastructure, which will be more expensive, but it could be worthwhile. So, you know, it's necessary to think about how the vehicle and charging specifications can work for individual organizations. And where attendees have business premises that need infrastructure, then we can help them calculate the approximate energy requirements needed to run their vehicles, which can help minimize on any on-site upgrade costs. You know, if you've got 5 vans charging on 7 kilowatt charge points, they might not actually need the whole 7 kilowatts for the time that they've available to charge. So, you know, we'll discuss smart charging, which should always be put in place. And by controlling the supply, it might be possible to save supply upgrade costs if the full charging rate isn't required for all the time the vehicles are plugged in. So, so basically, overall, we help organizations understand what they need to know, what might be possible, and help them have better conversations with suppliers. So that's my 5 minutes or so, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on this in a few minutes.
Great. Cheers, Ian. Plenty to think about and plenty more as well, which Ian's not had time to fit in. So I'm sure some questions will be forthcoming around some areas. We look forward to having a chat with you about that. Okay, let's talk about the impact of clean air zones or low emission zones on SMEs. So Heather, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I'm going to give an overview of clean air and low emission zones, what they mean for SMEs and how that contributes to them achieving net zero. So there are clean air zones in the UK, there are low emission zones, there are ultra low emission zones, zero emission zones, CAS, LES, ULEZ, ZES, different terminology, even more acronyms for us all to try and remember, but they all have the same primary objective, and that is to protect, protect public health by improving local air quality. So air pollution does occur when the harmful substances are released into the air, and some of which are being emitted from our vehicles' exhausts. Plus there's also particulate matter from tyre wear and road debris as well associated with road transport. And as a result, unfortunately, air pollution is a major public health concern. So in 2019, the World Health Organization published that air pollution and climate change were the greatest threats to human health. And in the UK, air pollution is estimated to cause 28,000 early deaths every year and costing the NHS around, £15 billion a year from the associated health impacts. It can affect everyone of all ages of life, but it's most likely to affect children and elderly. But drivers are also at risk as well. So drivers sitting in their vehicles surrounded by this air pollution that's coming out of exhausts, especially when sitting in slow-moving traffic with the window down. I don't mean to put a big downer on this session, but I do think it's important that we understand why air pollution is such a big focus in the UK. And as such, we are introducing clean air zones and low emission zones across the UK. So they focus on restricting access to the most polluting vehicles on our roads in areas of high pollution. And the restrictions are set sort of based on the Euro standard of your vehicle. The older, more polluting vehicles being targeted, and any vehicles that do meet the standard will be able to enter the zone sort of penalty and charge free. But each city is different, so there are different types of clean air and low emission zones. So depending on the city's biggest source of road transport pollution, a zone may only restrict access to buses or taxis, or if they see it as a big issue, they may restrict access to all vehicle types, including motorbikes. There's currently 9 zones in the UK that are live and being enforced, targeting a variety of vehicles, but there are 8 further zones sort of being planned as we speak. The BVRLA actually have a really great interactive map you can use to see where the different zones are, what support's available. But it's important for SMEs to really understand whether they face, whether they're going to face a daily charge or increasingly severe penalties depending on where you're operating. In order for you to prepare to understand this, do take a look at where whether there's a zone in the areas that you are operating, what types of vehicles you're running, are they subject to charges, are they subject to penalties, and what steps you can take. Local authorities will have a variety of support available, different support for different local areas. So I would advise SMEs to go to their council website and have a look at what's available to them. But in terms of what all businesses can do in preparation for clean air zones, regardless of whether there is support available or not, the good news is that what you can do doesn't really conflict with your goal of achieving net zero. It's actually quite the opposite. It's very complementary. In theory, you could avoid the zones and accept the added charges and penalties continue as is, but that doesn't really solve the problem, only delays it and costs your business more money and time. But you could rearrange your fleet and your routes, sort of putting clean air zone or low emission zone compliant vehicles on routes that will be entering that area, moving uncompliant vehicles on other routes. But are you actually working towards achieving net zero by doing that, or are you just avoiding the charges? By moving to sort of more compliant vehicles, as a minimum, Euro 6 for diesel or 4 for petrol. If you run heavy goods or specialist vehicles, you could look at retrofit or repowering options, or kind of following on from Ian's advice, looking at ways that you can go electric if you can. Because there is a zone like Oxford's zero emission zone, which opened in August this year, that doesn't charge zero emission vehicles, but it charges, the higher polluting your vehicle is, the more daily charge you face. And some cities may look at increasing their standards in the future, the closer we get to our net zero targets. But also following the sustainable travel hierarchy as well, and asking your staff to follow this where possible. So choosing EVs over internal combustion engine vehicles that you have in your fleet. Can you reduce the amount of vehicle journeys that you make through car sharing and public transport? Can you travel actively for any local and short journeys? Taking all these sort of positive actions will help your business realise a number of benefits. You've got the cost savings from avoiding the penalties, but also from spending less on fuel costs. You've got your reduction in exhaust emissions, helping to achieve net zero. In conjunction, you're also contributing to the improvement of air quality within the areas that you operate, making them nicer places to live and work, and contributing to better quality of life for your customers, your staff, and even yourself as well. So that's me. I don't know how to stop sharing.
Thanks, Heather. There you go. Well done. And thanks for that whistle-stop tour. Yeah, there's things going on that, are city specific, so we can probably come back to that a little bit later. We don't know everything that's happening in every city, but we can certainly try and point you in the right direction. Okay, and then last but not least, in this sort of quick tour, if you like, of different things that SMEs can be thinking about and doing is Nick. So a lot of SMEs obviously do deliveries. That's part of their business. And so some of the things that they can be thinking about for those deliveries, particularly local deliveries. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Tim. I'm just going to share my screen now and start the. There we go. Can everyone see that? Give us a shout, Tim, if everyone can see that.
Yeah, that's fine. We can see that. Let's go.
Okay, good. Thanks, Tim. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Ian and Heather there for kind of identifying a solution and the problem really, or the kind of the solution to air quality and the solution to maybe addressing it. And then what I'm going to do now is just try and pull that together and bring it into a bit of an SME context, because as both previous speakers said, SMEs do contribute to a lot of these kind of urban deliveries, if you like, which is where all these clean air zones are popping up for legitimate reasons. So first of all, let's just talk about kind of electrifying that last mile deliveries, and then we can use deliveries in quite a broad context, because Tim rightly said a lot of SMEs do deliveries, but also a lot of SMEs just kind of deliver services, if you like, to areas as well. So we can also include sort of electricians and plumbers into that kind of last mile delivery context, because a lot of those will be operating in a fairly local context. So let's just clarify what we mean by last mile. So last mile refers to the movement of goods from a supplier to the final delivery address, such as offices and homes. And like I just said, that could be food, it could be goods, or it could be a service. How does that normally happen? So traditionally, these last mile deliveries are undertaken by small diesel and petrol vans, and as we've heard, they contribute to congestion, poor air quality, and climate change through emissions. And why? Why is this an issue? Because actually, the last mile delivery has been experiencing year-on-year growth, and the COVID pandemic has only increased that because people are now doing a lot more online shopping, food ordering, and so actually, while the issue is getting worse because people are not necessarily traveling to the high street anymore to do their shopping, they're getting it delivered to their home, and that increases these kind of small journeys that have traditionally been done by diesel and petrol vans. So I've got a nice little slide here with some images and some indicative costs. What I will say is everything that you see today on this slide, and I think probably on the slides that you've seen previously from the other speakers, is available on our website, where I've put the website down there, including this Electrifying Last Mile Deliveries Guide, which we produced in conjunction with the Department for Transport last year. So if you do want to see any of these images or read a bit more about the things that we talk about, please visit our website and search for advice for SMEs, where you'll be able to find this guide amongst other services, including some of the training that Ian has spoke about that you can book onto. Okay, so on this slide, we've got basically three options for electrifying last mile deliveries. And I'm going to start very quickly with the electric vans, which Ian covered. That's a pretty simple transition. Transitioning a petrol or diesel vehicle to an electric van is a simple transition. However, there are some cons to that. It doesn't really address the congestion issue. The purchasing costs are still relatively high compared to some of the other options. You still need a kind of qualified driver, a driving license, insurance, tax, MOT, all those things. But you are addressing the emissions part of the issue, and also you may be able to not pay some of the low emission charging zone tariffs, because it is a zero tailpipe option. But what I'm going to focus on today is some of the kind of other alternative options, which we think are actually a bit more progressive, and for SMEs, certainly a bit more of a cost-effective option. The first of those is a powered light vehicle. You can see the chap here, the DPD chap. Some of the large courier companies are all now investing in powered light vehicles, especially in urban areas, because they do offer an option that is significantly cheaper than a traditional electric van, but also easier to operate in kind of congested urban areas. They are still subject to driving licenses, so you do need a license for them. They are subject to kind of road traffic laws, parking tickets and such, but they are a much more kind of nimble option for sort of urban deliveries, and could be a real option for SMEs, because they do have a very significant payload. So you can still transport tools, heavy goods in a light powered vehicle. Finally, what I'm going to focus on really is the kind of e-cargo bike and cargo bike option, which for SMEs is a significantly cheaper option and has a lot of benefits that I think I'm just going to go through now and cover quickly and answer any questions. First of all, they're classed as a bicycle, so they're not they don't need to be kind of driving license. They're not subject to parking tickets, parking restrictions. They can be wheeled through pedestrian zones. They can be used by pretty much anyone. Their power commitments are very low. You don't need any special infrastructure for sort of charging them. They can be charged from a 3-pin plug. And also, there are certain kind of funds available currently that will sort of subsidise the costs of purchasing an e-cargo bike. There are funds available in Scotland and England currently where you can get subsidised capital costs against an e-cargo bike. And for an SME delivering deliveries in an urban area, most of these e-cargo bikes will have a range of around 50 miles. So absolutely a convenient and a very cost-effective way of delivering e-cargo deliveries. And then finally, just a quick kind of slide here showing a bit of an indicative cost comparison from an e-cargo bike to a small diesel van. And you can see here that although these are indicative costs and costs change, you can see here there are some significant savings that a small, medium business can make by just transitioning one small diesel van or to a cargo bike or a trike, which could make the difference between a viable business and not a viable business. And then finally, I just want to point people to some of the options for e-cargo bikes. So obviously it lends itself very clearly to deliveries, but there are also lots of different business objectives that could be used around e-cargo bikes, such as inbound goods to suppliers switch, third-party good collections, inter-site shuttling, which we've seen some really interesting deliveries with the NHS, where the blood facility, transfer facility of NHS have been using an e-cargo bike to transfer blood samples between sites using a cargo bike rather than vans. So there's some really interesting, innovative ways that e-cargo bikes can be integrated into your business structure. I'm happy to take some questions after. Thanks, Tim.
Great, thanks a lot, Nick. So yeah, I think what we've tried to do today is just give you that sort of sense of all the different things that are going on. We're obviously focusing on SMEs at the moment. So for a long time, many of you will know the Energy Saving Trust was delivering fleet advice, and we still do that very much so. Our focus has been actually the public sector in recent years, but also SMEs, and increasingly, I think, as the market changes, and we've seen some fantastic changes, we see the number of registrations of electric vehicles is going through the roof, helped, I think, by the fact that there's no petrol or diesel at the pumps, or there wasn't up until just the last couple of days. So the interest in electric vehicles has definitely heightened, and they are very definitely normal, and that tipping point is close, if not, we're sort of smashing through it now. So I think it's really exciting times, but the organizations or the businesses that will struggle the most are SMEs, which is why for us SMEs are probably going to be our focus in the short term, to sort of just assist those small and micro businesses to kind of overcome some of the challenges around electrification and those challenges presented by clean air zones and so on. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a flavour. And I'm glad to see we've got a question that's just come through on the Q&A. Please do pop in some questions or some comments. If they're just comments, I'll read them out and then we'll have a little chat about them. I don't think I can bring you on screen to sort of present it yourself, but I'll certainly represent your question there. Hopefully one of the questions that we have had is poor Fiona, who's struggling to get into the session, so hopefully she's been able to find her way in. But the next question we've got here is whether SMEs have the time to think about going net zero when they're already struggling post-COVID. How can we communicate this need to them, and how can we make this there's actually 3 questions here. Well, let's take them one by one. All right, so do SMEs have time to think about going net zero when they're already struggling post COVID? Ian, do you want to pick that one up? Any thoughts around the sort of time commitment associated with decarbonisation, really?
Yeah, it's always going to be difficult. everyone has difficulty making time for these things. And, you know, in my 5-minute piece, I said, you know, often businesses haven't looked at electric vehicles for quite some time before they kind of engage with us or with the rest of the supply chain. And, you know, for good reason, they probably don't have time. But I think one area that is really important to focus on is the fact that in many instances, they could be saving a lot of money by electrifying the vehicles they're using. And, you know, most SME difficulties post-COVID are going to have a financial aspect to it. So I think that's the important thing, really, to kind of communicate to them, you know, what the savings can be for their operation, and then help them understand how to you know, relate those savings into their own business and understand how they can move forward from there, really.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think one of the things that we've always seen in the long time that we've been working with fleets is that quite often those organizations that are able to send people to events like this, it's less of a time commitment now, of course, but in the past, these events would have just been live events. So to send somebody out of the office when they're probably doing multiple tasks, you know, the idea that a small business has a fleet manager is probably not realistic. It's probably that person looks after the fleet and HR and the property and several other things besides. So, you know, I think the time issue and being able to kind of expose those SMEs to this kind of best practice, these sort of ideas, is an important one, and one that we're mindful of in terms of providing solutions that are quick and easy for SMEs to pick up and use. So, for example, we've got a fleet management toolkit on our website that small businesses can use so that they're adopting best practice without having to invest a lot of time or as much time. The kind of next related question, Heather, is about communications, really. And I know you've been doing some communications work up in Scotland around some of the initiatives that and some of the support that's available. So how can we communicate the need for decarbonisation to small and micro businesses, do you think?
I think it kind of goes back to what Ian's saying. It's focusing on what the benefits are to that organisation, cost savings being one of the sort of key areas or the key benefit in my eyes. But also, it's good from a PR point of view for these businesses. It's a good PR opportunity, a good way for them to kind of promote their business if they do adopt these cleaner technologies as well. It's a great area for them to get new customers on board as well. I don't know about you, but whenever you are seeing anything online or anything to do with finding out about your business, people want to know what environmental policies and plans that you have in place of decarbonising your fleet or decarbonising your business. So even going back to one of the previous speakers, I've forgotten her name, apologies, but she said, even just putting a plan in place just now, just starting to think about it. If you can't take the steps because you are struggling because of COVID, just start putting plans in place, figuring out who to talk to, figuring out where you can get support, and start getting that journey started.
Great. Yeah, no, I agree with that, Heather. And a sort of connected question, and Nick, I'll come to you for this one, really. And it's, in a sense, it's a challenge for us as an organisation. It's a challenge for the BVRLA, who represent some of the suppliers in this area. Is how can we, the sort of royal we, help to make this transition as easy as possible? Nick, what are some of the things you think we as an organisation could do as we think about SMEs?
Well, I think the first thing is and what we do, what we try to do, especially through some of the work that Ian does and some of the work that we do more broadly in some of the programs, is kind of debunk some of the myths around decarbonisation. Plain English, like the question kind of alludes to, an SME operator probably has about 6 hats that they have to wear on a daily basis, whether that be the CEO, the delivery driver, the orderer. And so actually giving SMEs a bit of headspace to be able to just come in, feel like they can ask the questions that they want to ask, even that feel maybe a bit silly to them. I mean, Energy Saving Trust is a consumer advice organisation at the heart of it, and so what we try and do across all our programs is to make that advice accessible, easy to understand, and most importantly impartial, because what SMEs don't have time to do is to get 3 quotes of advice to understand which one is actually giving them the advice that's right for them, rather than them just trying to kind of sell a product. So what we try and do is do all that evaluation for you, if you like, and just give you an honest opinion on what we think will be the best for your business or your home or your vehicle. So really, I think that's what we're trying to do. And of course, we can always do more. Reach is important, and in this kind of a very cluttered world of noise, whether that be social media or traditional kind of media, print media, it's very difficult sometimes to get that message out there, but we do our best to try and cut through all that, if you like.
Yeah, we do indeed. And actually SMEs are quite a difficult audience to reach, particularly the very small businesses, because they're focused completely on just their business. And actually, the idea of just being able to sort of talk to a business owner, a very small business owner, it's quite a challenge. So actually, some of these things will be deprioritized. But interestingly, one of the things that I've noticed recently are businesses in Scotland who are taking up the electric vehicle loan. That's an interest-free loan that we offer up in Scotland for cars and vans, taxis as well, and also e-bikes. And that is growing in popularity, particularly for cars. And actually, we are oversubscribed with the electric vehicle loan up in Scotland, and it's really good to see small businesses taking that up in order so that they can buy, actually at times quite nice EVs for themselves, probably for the directors. But yeah, it's good news. All right, I'm just going to go a little bit granular, because one of the challenges I know that small businesses have is around their van fleet. So Ian, this one's going to be for you. And just kind of dealing with this issue of employees who take their vehicles home. And it's probably the biggest challenge that exists for most businesses, but particularly small businesses who won't have a depot. So they're not able to do depot charging. Ian, do you want to just sort of outline very briefly what those challenges are and what some of the solutions might be?
Yeah, well, the challenges, the number one challenge, I guess, is van drivers who don't have off-street parking. So, an awful lot has been discussed in this area over recent years, and in some instances that may well be over 50% of certain organisations' drivers. So, it can be a really big problem. Another area is reimbursing drivers for home electricity used if they have got off-street parking, and we hear there has been use of the electricity rate for cars for vans, which isn't really going to work because most vans will use more power than the average car. So I guess they are probably the two large challenges, really. In some ways, SMEs might have a bit of an advantage over larger organisations here, because you kind of, one thing that you have never needed to do before with your van drivers is find out if they've got off-street parking. So there's something else to think about in the vehicle renewal cycle. But if you have fewer vehicles, then it is easier to find out, well, is there on-street parking available? Is there rapid charging available that the drivers could use instead of, or to supplement off-street parking? So that can be quite helpful, and that's probably the first port of call, just to find out what on street or local car park or rapid charging infrastructure is available locally for your drivers. In terms of reimbursing drivers for electricity used, well, you can, put a case to your local tax people to actually pay, whatever amount. So that's another area that may well be useful. Probably pay them significantly more than 4p a mile, and there are solutions from providers who will help you manage payment to drivers kind of automatically anyway. So there's a number of ways around this, but yeah, they're probably the two most difficult aspects to cover.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. And I think that's the one that a lot of businesses, both large and small, are kind of agonizing over at the moment. And, one of the things that we work, the area that we work in is supporting government in providing funding for local charging infrastructure in residential areas where people don't have driveways. And of course, I think there's going to be a significant uptick in the investment in that area. And that's really important, I think. So I guess that sort of leads me to a question around what government can do, and whether government, there's always more that government can do, and it always involves more money. Because we're funded by government, we are always sensitive to the fact that those government officials that are making these decisions have difficult decisions to make. So we understand that. But I guess just from the team, perhaps, are there any areas that could do with further investment? Is there more that government can be doing to help in this area? Heather, have you got any ideas on sort of further support government could offer SMEs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think just not. I think engaging with them a lot more, especially in sort of consultation around what funding and support that they are offering, and before they're changing funding and support, to make sure that if it is recognised that SMEs are going to struggle with the achievement of net zero, that funding's designed around that to avoid that, to kind of identify who's most negatively going to be impacted as we transition towards net zero, and how we can support them. I'd say that's one of the key areas for me. And also, not looking at innovative solutions as well, not just giving sort of the advice around switching to electric vehicles and switching to active travel, which is absolutely essential, but also looking at solutions around multimodal options and mobility as a service, and how that works for businesses, and because that's a concept that's being looked at for consumers, where they've got multiple modal options at their fingertips in the future, but how do businesses fit in with that transition? Is it suitable for them, and how can we get them on board as well? And can that play a role in sort of last mile delivery too?
Yeah, I'd agree. And I'm just going to stick with you, Heather, because I was just wondering, you didn't mention a lot about the Low Emission Zone Support Fund up in Scotland, which is quite an interesting way that government is looking to support small businesses that are affected by the low emission zones, in Scotland. Do you want to just kind of expand on that a little bit, and perhaps how that could grow to help more small businesses in areas where low emission zones are going to be implemented?
Yep, absolutely. So in Scotland, I manage the Low Emission Zone Support Fund and the Low Emission Zone Retrofit Fund. So that supports sole traders and micro businesses in preparing for the introduction of 4 low emission zones in Scotland: Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Dundee. So any businesses that operate within those areas can get grant funding towards the safe disposal of an uncompliant vehicle. That money can then be used to move towards a compliant vehicle, or improve their business and reduce their overall business emissions if they're moving away from a vehicle entirely. And for the retrofit fund for any sort of HGVs or maybe specialist vans that are incredibly expensive to replace, and you know, they maybe don't want to dispose of them quite yet. They want to keep them on the road as long as they can. There are there's a grant for retrofit options as well. So any retrofits or repowering solution that is accredited with the Clean Vehicle Retrofit Accreditation Scheme, or CVRAS, another acronym, they can apply for grant funding to have their vehicle upgraded, as you were, to be low emission zone compliant. I'd say, having had a look at, in sort of preparation for this, having had a look at a lot of the clean air zones in England, there seems to be, you know, quite good funding options for, you know, grants for replacements or grants for disposal and scrappage of uncompliant vehicles, and retrofit solutions as well across England for small businesses and micro businesses. So I would say that a lot of the local authorities, sorry, I'm kind of sorry, Tim, I'm kind of I did see Rachel's question. I'd say that, you know, they have sort of been adequately empowered, and that they have had the ability to provide that support at a local level as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we can sort of just kind of segue into that question really, which is about, you know, what are local authorities doing? Have they got the powers? Have they got the funding? Often, you know, one of the challenges with clean air, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, is a sort of clear understanding of whose responsibility it is, and that tension between central and local government about who has to fix this, and that's something that we've been sort of mindful of. I guess just picking that up, and Nick, maybe coming to you around where local authorities are sort of putting in place both incentives, but also perhaps additional kind of penalties for those who are non-compliant. Do you think they've got the powers? Have they got the funding available to them? How does that look in the real world?
Yeah, yeah. Just picking up actually on a couple of points here, because I was just jotting them down as I saw the questions come up, and it kind of ties it all together. I think one of the key things for SMEs, individuals, local authorities, is a bit of a clarity on policy. We've picked that up on kind of several sort of pieces of work that we've done across local authority and small businesses, is around these requirements around clean air, around decarbonisation. Usually involve fairly big financial decisions, which on the whole, I think most people are willing to make, as long as they feel confident that that is the direction that we are going to be going medium to long term. So I think the government in the past maybe have lacked a little bit of clarity, but certainly in the last year, there's several kind of quite strategic policy documents that have come out: Transport Decarbonisation Plan, the impending hydrogen strategy, and the impending kind of EV infrastructure strategy really does give that clarity of policy, which will then trickle down to a local authority context, which again suffers with probably financial decisions around what they spend their money on, and again will then trickle down to their residents. In terms of incentives, like Heather touched on, local authorities across England, Wales and Scotland are all kind of looking to incentivise businesses and individuals to make that transition. And in fact, on our website, we do have an EV incentives map where we list local authority incentives at local authority level, so that people can actually go in and see their local authority to find out what incentives are available to them. There'll always be more that people that we can do, and there is still a bit of a kind of nervousness around EV charging, for instance, and around whose responsibility EV charging infrastructure is. I think the answer is it's a bit of a kind of old hat answer, but it's a blended model. You know, there is a commercial responsibility for commercial entities to provide charging, but I do think there is a responsibility for local authorities as well, especially around when we're looking at the levelling up agenda and not leaving areas of boroughs and counties without that infrastructure, because it doesn't make any commercial sense right now for commercial entities to take up on that. So I think local authorities do have a responsibility to make that charging, and there are incentives out there at the moment to do that. There's obviously the AUX scheme across the UK, which will pay for 75% of residential charging, of which, to be honest, SMEs might even benefit from that, because SMEs are usually the people that are taking vans home and not charging at depots. So, you know, you could take advantage of that. But I think there will be more ambitious funding pot, shall we say, coming in the near future that will look at maybe rapid and fast charging for SMEs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually quite fun, isn't it? It's not often that I get to just sit and chat to my, my team. It's quite good. Thanks, guys. We've got a few minutes left. So we had a couple of comments about Turnkey Solutions. And, you know, I guess the idea... Ian, do you know what a turnkey solution is?
Not really.
Oh,
No.
All right, well, that's good. Does anyone know what a turnkey solution is?
Yeah, well, I guess it's you know, here you go, mate. It will cost you £300 a month, and it will solve all your problems. I think you know, some suppliers perhaps have you know, developed kind of leasing packages which will help do that, incorporate charging infrastructure, probably even electricity supply within, you know, within a fixed cost. And I think that, yeah, I mean, that's all part of the market, and you know, all important stuff, and perhaps things like some of the apps which enable people to use while they're driving, to understand, you know, what would they have saved, could they have done the journey, you know, in an electric vehicle. All those sort of tools really help. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's any substitute for sitting down with somebody and actually being able to discuss sensibly, you know, how you can put these vehicles in operation. I think one last piece on the government question, going back a couple of questions, anything government do to help SMEs. I think it's continuing. I think it's continuing the dialogue with BVRLA and other trade bodies, because at the end of the day, they all have memberships, many of whom are SMEs. So by doing that, that will enable the right sort of information to eventually get to the smaller end users, and you know, and the greater supply chain to get to them.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, I mean, just sticking with this turnkey theme, and Mel's come on with a question around, you know, turnkey. I mean, I think the thing about turnkey is it's a term that catches quite a lot of things, but I guess in this instance, Mel is suggesting that it could be a sort of subscription type model where you get your car, you get your charging, you get possibly everything else sort of thrown in, so you have a very clear idea of fixed costs. I think also, you know, it's probably interesting from a management point of view, whereas in the old days, you know, things like telematics were quite expensive and a big investment. These days, you know, actually a lot of the tech is incorporated into the vehicle, so potentially even that could be incorporated as part of the full solution. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys on the team has any experience of any examples of small businesses that are adopting some of these solutions, but it seems, you know, that could be a really interesting model where things are wrapped up together that make it very easy to purchase, very easy to manage, and look after without lots of kind of investment in time, which we mentioned earlier, but also financial investment if they can be done efficiently. Anyone want to volunteer for that one before Nick, go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, slightly. I mean, not exactly answering the question, but just to kind of give a little bit more colour on it. Yeah, there. I think we're at the tip of that kind of model, where energy, what we maybe term as energy integration, if we're talking about electrification, is where we will be packaging up our home and charging kind of tariffs together, and included in that, I see almost an option where you will be able to kind of bolt on, if you like, a car, a charge point, your tariff, and then kind of sign up to like you say, a subscription, a bit like a mobile phone, really, where you'll be able to sign up for 3 years and have all those things delivered to you with a set price or a variable price, depending on what package you go with. And at the end of those 3 years, you either swap out your vehicle, get a new one, or hand it all back, if you like. I know there are certainly areas around the charge point home charge point deployment, where there are certain legislations around making charge points smart, so that if you do want to change provider, if you like, you don't have to then swap out all your charging equipment, because you'll be able to almost go from one, use a mobile phone context, go from O2 to Vodafone without having to kind of hand everything back. So I definitely think that's on the cards, and I think some of the electric vehicle sort of designers and kind of manufacturers, while they're now at the moment maybe working with some of the larger companies, it's at the sort of benefit of the SMEs, because they will be able to benefit from that design and research in future.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Toby Poston's with us, and Toby, it's great to have you. Yeah, I mean, one of the models, actually, I only discovered this company recently myself, which is Onto. They're doing a subscription model for electric vehicles where everything's rolled in together, and it's not like leasing where you have to acquire the vehicle for a number of months. You can literally have it for a month or two and hand it back with everything being included, which is really interesting. Likewise, another, and I'm sure there are other businesses doing that as well, by the way. The other one is also a sort of around the charging infrastructure, where one sort of innovation project that we're working on with Octopus Energy is around wrapping the lease of the vehicle with the charging, but not just charging, vehicle to grid. So then it actually also links to your home tariff for energies, which is, I mean, a completely different way of thinking about how we fuel our vehicles. It's sort of linked to our domestic energy, our home energy, through vehicle to grid type solution. So really interesting. Ian, you were going to come in, I think.
Yeah, I lost my thread there.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say is, yeah, I think a very flexible model is really useful for SMEs, because they tend to be more flexible in the period of time they keep vehicles. I mean, even including not even new vehicles might work very well in that area. So I think yeah, that could be very useful for them.
Yeah. Okay. And then again, Toby's put a question in about infrastructure, which is probably a fairly good place as we start to think about rounding off the session, and consolidating demand, which is, I think, something for SMEs that would be really helpful to consider. So, how can, well, I'll read it. Are there opportunities for SMEs to consolidate demand for infrastructure and either share the costs or make a case for public charge point provision? This is quite a complex area, and we won't cover it all in the next 5 minutes. But Ian, do you mind if I just come back to you on this as to what consolidation opportunities there are?
Yeah, I think that could be a real challenge, certainly for SMEs. Maybe not so much for organisations such as government departments, for example, where there is much more communication between them. But I think there is a consolidation opportunity on trading estates, etc. The management companies that run trading estates, I think they've got great opportunities for putting charge point provision into those sort of areas.
Cool. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the team if they can think of one thing that the industry can do, because this is an industry conference, and so most of you are probably representing the fleet industry through one way or another, whether it's leasing, whether it's daily rental, or further along the supply chain. So what is one thing that the industry can do in terms of solutions or advice or support that will benefit SMEs on their journey to decarbonize and hit net zero? So I've sprung this on them. I didn't give them any preparation time for this whatsoever, so they're desperately trying to think, what on earth do I say to answer this question? So Nick, I'm going to come to you first. What is the one thing that industry can do to support SMEs on their net zero journey?
Well, it's a boring answer, but I think it's probably the most important one, and it's the cost consideration for SMEs and understanding that their margins are incredibly tight, and the fact that any kind of transition will be a very kind of hard thought about transition. And so when it comes to making a vehicle choice, it will probably invariably not come down to policy, but also to cost. So it's bearing that in mind at the front, which I'm sure industry do because that's their kind of bread and butter, but ultimately probably is the most important consideration.
Okay, great. Heather, why don't I come to you now? What's the one big thing that the industry can do?
Next on my one, no. I would say that if they're really keen on supporting SMEs and making this journey, then definitely sort of open the engagement channels, really make the effort to fully understand the barriers that SMEs are facing if they don't already. And when they do have that opportunity to make these decisions around their products or make around their pricing structures, or even feeding back to consultations with the government, keeping those barriers and that in mind when they're making these decisions, and trying to sort of represent them as much as they can within their powers.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Nice one. And finally, Ian.
Yeah, I think the industry as a whole needs to have a very positive outlook on this and think about what is possible now, what does work, and what will help businesses save money and move forward towards net zero. And actually point out the sooner you start, the easier it will be.
Absolutely. And, I'm just going to touch on a point that Mel O'Rourke has put in the Q&A, which is actually really about innovation. And, these subscription models that we were discussing earlier, Mel's point is that there could be a mandate to ensure that the vehicles are replaced on a very regular basis to ensure that, they're offering optimum technology and ultimate efficiency. So, I think that's a really sensible point and ultimately a good place to finish, which is that the industry itself, whether it's leasing or daily rental and all the other kind of models that there are to supply vehicles to SMEs, ensure that SMEs have access to the newest, the cleanest, the most technically advanced vehicles possible. And some of the subscription models, of course, one of the risks that avoids is the technology kind of becoming obsolete, at the point when you buy the vehicle. So, that could be a really interesting model for mobility providers in this sector. And of course, I think that sort of summarizes the journey that we as an industry are on from, traditional leasing. You have a vehicle for 3 years, 36,000 miles, to something much more flexible, much more advanced, much more sensitive to technology. And I think that sort of innovation will really assist SMEs, perhaps SMEs more so than large businesses who can take bigger risks and longer term risks. So I think that's really interesting, a really great place to end our session. Just before we do, I want to thank Ian, Heather and Nick for their contribution, for taking the time out from their day today to join us, and it's been really nice just having a chat actually. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for joining this session,